Welcome everyone, Costin here with my revised list of the top 5 legendary lords in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. I've done a list like this before, revising it because of various changes that Creative Assembly has made to the game, as well as certain realizations that I've made, especially when it comes to the mid-late game potential of certain legendary lords, as opposed to just the early game potential of certain lords. Though, yeah, there's going to be some commonality, though some choices on this list are obviously going to be surprising to some people. By the way, let's get started. At number 5, it is Grombrindal of the Dwarves. The Dwarves are not a particularly strong race in Total War Warhammer 3, but Grombrindal is an amazingly powerful legendary lord. In fact, I would dare say that if he was a legendary lord for a stronger race or a much stronger race, he would be flat out the best or one of the best in the entire game. Like, he's certainly top 3. But because he's a legendary lord for the dwarves, he certainly gets knocked down to number 5 or even lower, dependent on how you're viewing the situation. Now, the problem with the dwarves are, well, grudges aren't particularly well handled, haven't been, though they have been fixed with some recent patches. And on top of that, the dwarves do suffer from an early game situation, especially if they're fighting greenskins or other threats where they just end up being flat out outnumbered. Now, Grombrindal has an advantage from the very start because he's not going to be dealing with greenskins. Rather, he's going to be dealing with Malekith over here in Nagorand. Or rather, he's going to deal with Skaven, but it's a minor Skaven faction. They get wiped out by you and Malekith very quickly, and then you beat up Malekith pretty early on. But that's not what makes Grombrindal really strong or makes him elevates him on this to be on this list. One thing to say is that he has 4 quest battles, and that means he can earn a lot of money from those quest battles and certainly get ahead economically, solving some of the major issues that the dwarves do encounter early on in their campaign. But what makes Grombrindal amazing is his special blue skill line. Not his special skill line, the yellow one over here at the top. That's pretty good in itself, but rather the special blue skill line that he does get. Now, this blue skill line will by default give 20% from tariffs. And then you've got Ancient Acumen, free recruit rank, all armies faction-wide, 15% recruitment cost, 15% campaign movement range for all characters faction-wide. So you can get to battles much faster than pretty much anyone else. I don't think any other faction in the game has as much of a benefit to campaign movement range as Grombrindal can get. Or, you know, obviously Valkia gets a lot of benefits if she wins battles, so does Skarbrand's faction, but just a passive increase of 15% campaign movement range for absolutely relentless is incredible. Then, dwarves have poor casualty replenishment. No problem, Grombrindal gives them 6% to all characters faction-wide, and then 1 global recruitment capacity. And by the way, he personally can get to 30% campaign movement range because these two, if I'm not mistaken, do stack. And then finally, on top of that, he does have the Living Ancestor event. Every 25 turns or faster, if you get this skill in the time of the Ancestors, he can get either an army buff, a personal combat skill buff, or a benefit to research, upkeep and so on, or a significant benefit, a ridiculous benefit in terms of casualty replenishment. Plus 20% casualty replenishment only for his army, but 20% campaign replenishment, and you can get this after the first 2 turns of your campaign, is one of the highest any faction in the game can get early on in their campaign. And by the way, the campaign movement benefit stacks also with a Master Engineer, and a Master Engineer is obviously going to increase your movement range even further. So Grombrindal is absolutely insane in how much he can provide to his faction, how much he pushes the dwarf to go from a weak race to being extremely powerful with the benefits he provides them in a campaign. And the great part about Grombrindal is you don't actually need to play him to get most of the benefits he provides. Yes, you do need to play him to get the Living Ancestor event, but you don't need to play Grombrindal to get access to the special blue skill line. If you confederate Grombrindal or use a mod to recruit defeated legendary lords, you can get him as any other dwarf legendary lord and give yourself a significant amount of power in your campaign. Grombrindal is incredible. Certainly one of the most valuable legendary lords that does exist currently in the game, even if you're not playing him. And that's something that really sets him apart, because generally when a legendary lord is powerful, it's because of benefits you get when playing their campaign. With Grombrindal, you don't have to play him. Now, of course, getting access to him if you're playing any other dwarf lord is a problem. Mods can help with that, but it can be a problem because he's very far away from the rest of them. That's the one downside of his campaign, and the downside in trying to get access to him. But outside of that, yeah, Grombrindal has the best dwarven campaign, the best benefits, the greatest amount of power, and he takes a weak race and certainly elevates them far above than what they can be. And for that, I personally feel that he earns a spot on this list. You may disagree with this decision. I wouldn't blame you for it, but considering what this guy brings to the table, I certainly think he is very much worth talking about in a list like this. And number 4, it is Alith Anar for the High Elves. Tyrion certainly gets high marks, so does Elfarion, but Alith Anar's power is beyond both of them. So, what does he get? Well, he gets 10% campaign movement range for all his armies. Grombrindal earns his power for 15%. Certainly Alith Anar earns it for 10%. Though, that's not necessarily unique. I mean, there are certainly other legendary lords that give a campaign movement range. But then we've got Alith Anar's special skill tree. There's a bunch of things available here, but one of the most significant ones is 12% missile strength to all armies faction-wide. He also gets campaign movement range plus 15% after winning a battle, so he's kind of like a mini Valkia who already is a mini Skarbrand. Or, okay, a great deal of power when it comes to that. It goes even further. Quite a bit further. And it's one benefit that you wouldn't necessarily understand until you actually play his campaign and figure out just how significant this guy is. So his default campaign movement stance is an ambush stance. It's a weaker ambush stance with an ambush success chance of minus 15%. So if I take him against this army, maybe I get an ambush, maybe I don't. But the chance is there at the very least. And you can buff this chance as well. There are ways to obviously increase your ambush chance in a campaign with Ancient Cunning in particular. So plus 30%, which means that your default movement for all your armies, not just for Alith Anar, all of your armies is an ambush, is the potential of an ambush. That is already incredible power, which will give you a significant advantage in a lot of battles, because an ambush will put your army in a very favorable position and give the enemy army a major debuff at the start of the battle. It goes even further than that though, because Alith Anar on all of his armies has the underway. It's called the Shadow Realm, but it's basically an underway mechanic. So he can traverse the map and traverse terrain better than anyone else. And that gives him a significant advantage when it comes to the campaign. He's nowhere near as powerful in combat, personally, as Tyrion is, because ranged heroes and ranged lords and legendary lords, with the exception of the Sisters of Twilight, but generally speaking, ranged lords and heroes are pretty weak because, well, they have a lot of issues in terms of even being able to get their shots off. So Alith Anar certainly doesn't have the best personal combat potential, but it doesn't matter because his army is so strong and so versatile and will just run in circles on the campaign map and in battle compared to the enemy. On top of that, his army is built around the idea of getting Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warriors, which are also pretty good units to begin with. Like Shadow Walkers in particular, just basically an improved version of the Shadow Warriors. More expensive, take more time to recruit, and only Alith Anar gets access to them. So you need to play him to get access to a lot of his benefits. To all these benefits, the stances, the campaign movement range. But that is an incredible amount of power that he does have available. If there's any downside with Alith Anar, it's this, that he can't colonize Ulf 1 because it's not considered pleasant climate, though you can colonize wastelands, frozen, and frozen climate. So you can take over the entirety of Nagrand, and also a good portion of Norska while we're at it, and even Kislev over here. You could take over a large portion of northern Kislev at the very least. So whether or not you'd want to, that's a completely different discussion. But regardless, Alith Anar has an incredible amount of power on the campaign map and in battles because of all the ambushes you're going to get. And even when you don't get ambushes, you will have a significant amount of range power available to you.
Revenge.
At number 3, we have Grom the Paunch. The Greenskins are a very powerful race, and that certainly helps carry Grom. A Greenskin Legendary Lord would have made the cut on this list regardless, and certainly a high position because of the power of the race. The reason the race is so powerful is they've got incredibly good early game units, if you own the DLC, the Skarsnik DLC, with Nasty Skulkers. And they have the WA mechanic, so they can get 2 armies in each army, basically. You bring 40 units for each army when you have a WA active. That's already good power. Good hero selection, and in particular the Death Hags, the Giant River Troll Hags rather, will give you a good amount of casualty replenishment even at level 1. Okay, that's pretty good. But why Grom in particular? What makes Grom so special? Well, in terms of his special skill tree, I'll be quite blunt about it. I don't necessarily think he is that amazing when it comes to his special skill tree. Though he does buff goblins in a pretty solid way, and he does have that magic item drop chance and income from sacking settlements. He does get a fairly good growth benefit, and Greenskins already have a ridiculous amount of growth. But they need that growth because they're going to be sacking a lot of settlements they take. They need that for their economy. But I wouldn't say Grom is the best fighter. However, none of that freaking matters. Because Grom has access to his special cauldron. And it's this cauldron that makes Grom so incredibly powerful. The green skill line buffs his ranged units through the roof. Ammo, explosive ammunition, all that kind of good stuff. The red line gives you some campaign benefits, like very early on you can get growth with you can get 10 growth to all provinces. That's on top of all the other growth benefits that Greenskins have, or reduce the enemy leadership, or cooldown to all spells, or frenzy for goblins and non-goblin units, so Nasty Skulker is becoming even more dangerous. Blue skill line buffs your economy, global recruitment, all that kind of good stuff. And one of the ones you do get very early on is Ocean Clams, because you start at war with the Bretonnian faction. They've changed which Bretonnian factions you start at war with, by the way. But this gives you 10% casualty replenishment for a race that already has access to pretty good casualty replenishment, though it can take you until tier 3 if you're playing as another Greenskin Legendary Lord. But he does get that Death Hack from the very start, and he gets 10% on top of that. Yeah, that is pretty insane. Yellow is all about monstrous units, essentially, or research, but mainly monstrous units. But hey, 10% research campaign benefit. And then you've got essentially melee benefits with the orange line. And you gain a huge amount of power. Like, from the very start, you can literally print money with Ocean Clans. The Greenskins are already a rich faction. The fact that you can print money as playing this guy is absolutely insane. So you just fight a battle, sack a settlement, and then you get access to, and then you sack, yeah. You sack a Bretonnian settlement, and then you can just print money using that every turn. They've limited. They actually nerfed this, by the way. They nerfed it so you can't use it multiple times a turn, I believe. But even so, it is still ridiculously powerful. In fact, Grom is so insanely good that even the fact that he starts in unpleasant climate in Bretonia is not something that's going to hold him back. I've played as Grom. I've burnt Alpha Lorem to the ground, burnt Reichland to the ground as well within the first 30 turns of the campaign, and the only issue I faced when playing as Grom was actually Durfo. Another benefit for Grom, beyond everything, the Cauldron, the power of the Greenskins, is the fact that he can settle Ulthuan. You can make Ulthuan a greenskin paradise, essentially, because it's really good. It's really good as a region on the campaign map. It's got some really good provinces that will significantly help your economy. And it's also relatively safe. So Grom has a lot going for him. The greenskins have a lot going for them. And that just creates a combination of a lord that buffs his faction by quite a lot, along with a race that, even without those buffs, is still very, very strong. Like, even a generic lord with no faction benefits would be very strong as the Greenskins. You add the buffs that Grom gives, which are far more significant than anyone else gives, then you get to ridiculous levels. And one crucial benefit, faction-wide, is that he gets that global recruitment duration for goblin units, faction-wide. So that means when you're recruiting goblin archers and then nasty skulkers and night goblins and all that, you can get them through global recruitment in one turn, as opposed to having to wait multiple turns in the campaign. And that is pretty ridiculous when you add it all up. It's an incredibly powerful combination. Grom has been one of the best legendary lords, if not the best legendary lord, one of the best legendary lords ever since he was added. He's certainly been, I think, either at the #1 spot or contending for the #1 spot for the Greenskins ever since he was added in the game. That's what you get with DLC legendary lords, usually speaking. They usually rise to the top until Creative Assembly makes some changes. Very rarely do you see that not happening. But yeah, Grom, #3 spot. Now at #2, and to no one's surprise, it is Archaon the Everchosen of the Warriors of Chaos. The Warriors of Chaos, in general, the legendary lords of the Warriors of Chaos, are some of the strongest legendary lords in the game. In fact, I could have made this list all about them, with one major exception, and I wouldn't have necessarily been wrong in doing so. I did decide to just put one legendary lord from each race, but yeah, Warriors of Chaos are very strong, especially the undivided ones like Archaon and Be'lakor, and even if we go over here to Cafe with Kolic, they're all very strong in their own ways, but Archaon, I think, is a step above them. So first off, he personally gets a significant army benefit with 3% weapon and missile strength per rank achieved, and 5% ward save for his entire army. He is an absolute beast to face in combat, to begin with, from the very start. On top of that, he also has a very easy and very strong starting position over here in the right wing fortress, surrounded by a bunch of minor factions that are very, very easy to take down and vassalize. The only challenge Archaon will face for the first 20, maybe even 30 turns of his campaign is going to be Boris Ursus, and Boris is much, much weaker than Archaon overall. One significant benefit to the Warriors of Chaos as a faction is, of course, their Dark Fortresses, because their Dark Fortresses are very difficult to take down. They're formidable defensive locations, and generally the AI will not even attack a Dark Fortress unless you literally just took it recently and then moved your army far away, and so the garrison is not up to full strength. I've pretty much never seen the AI attack a full strength Dark Fortress of, let's say, tier 3 and 4, and even if they did, you would wipe them out or hold back a significant tide of enemies with just the garrison, let alone your armies. You also have a great recruitment, unit upgrade system. Not necessarily the best recruitment system in the world, though it does work quite well. And Archaon does start early on. He can get access to the Swords of Chaos as a Regiment of Renown. He starts with the Gifted Chaos of Hell Cannon. He gets all of the gifts of chaos from all the possible chaos gods. Undivided is stronger because of this, because combining Slaanesh, Nurgle, Khorne, and Tzeentch, along with Undivided, is an incredible amount of power. But then we get into why Archaon is so far ahead of every other legendary lord of the Warriors of Chaos. His faction benefits. For every vassal, and Warriors of Chaos can get a lot more vassals than anyone else in the game. In the first 10 turns as Archaon, you can get 10 plus vassals with relative ease, honestly. But for every vassal, he gets 10% research, so he gets access to his entire research tree much faster than any other faction in the game. He gets 25 souls, which are crucial for unlocking the gifts of chaos, so Archaon can get access to high-end demonic armies, bloodthirsters, and the like far faster than anyone else because of that souls benefit. And he gets 10 to diplomatic relations with all of the Chaos factions, basically. Demons of Chaos, Norska, Warriors of Chaos. So that will help him in assembling a grand coalition and even vassalizing factions, because you can vassalize through diplomacy. You don't just need to subjugate a faction. And of course, you can subjugate a faction, including human factions, by just taking over their last settlement and using that subjugate option. So Archaon is incredibly powerful. So powerful that by turn 30 of your campaign, you can have so many vassals with so much power behind them that when you declare war on a faction, you can literally do nothing and your vassals will win the war, and you'll still win the war with a great deal of ease in your campaign without too much stress. Yes, the limitation on recruitment of the Warriors of Chaos isn't necessarily the most pleasant in all situations, but Archaon makes it work far, far better than anyone else. Also, he has a bunch of quest battles for the rewards, income, etc. He has a good skill line. He's got a lot of things going for him if you are going to play him as a legendary lord of chaos. I mean, Be'lakor is number 2, but there's a huge gap between Be'lakor and Archaon, just as much as there is a gap between Be'lakor and everyone else. Like, Be'lakor is already pretty good because of his portals, his campaign ability, but Archaon, I feel, works a lot better because of the souls benefit, diplomatic relations, and research benefit. All working together to give this guy a significant power on the campaign map. And even in battles, he does have a significant benefit, because those souls will translate into powerful faction buffs and powerful units, demonic units they can use. Of course, he's not like Be'lakor, who can make an entire demonic army. You do have a limit on gifted units, but all the same, still a great deal of power available to him, and very easily accessible at that. So Archaon certainly earns his number 2 spot. Before, he was even number 1 by quite a bit, but some things have changed. Now, for some honorable mentions before I go into the number 1 spot, of course, Lokir Fellheart of the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves are a pretty good race, and honestly, I considered including Lokir in this list as opposed to Grombrindal, but Grombrindal's campaign benefits just can't be ignored. All the same, though, Lokir has some very significant benefits, especially because of that unique right he has access to if you're playing him, as well as the ability to recruit more Black Arcs than anyone else. Black Arcs are incredibly powerful, and Lokir certainly will benefit a great deal from having a lot of them. And he also is in Cafe, which is a really good place to start your campaign in. And then, of course, another choice would be, another honorable mention would be Helman Gorst, because of his significant zombie benefits. He can maintain very powerful armies of zombies, which he buffs through the roof faction-wide, and they're very, very cheap. That's the real benefit for Helman Gorst. It's not that his armies are so incredibly powerful, but rather they're very affordable as well. They're good, but they're also very, very affordable, so you can maintain larger armies, far larger armies, than any of the other legendary lords of the vampire counts that are going to, because they're so cheap. But of course, the number 1 spot would have to go to a recent addition, and that's Orion. Now, I can't play Orion, I don't have the DLC, but when I look at his faction benefits, it's hard to not get the impression that this guy is the most powerful legendary lord in Warhammer 3. Let me explain. The Wood Elves are a very powerful race, and they have a similar benefit with their special trees as the Warriors of Chaos have with their Dark Fortresses. Basically, since you only have provincial capitals, more or less, that you're looking to control throughout your campaign, that gives you a great deal of power because the AI is rarely going to attack your capitals. It might attack your minor settlements, but you don't really care too much about your minor settlements. And the Wood Elves have a very powerful ranged army and melee army. Specifically, their melee power comes from all their monstrous units, right? Treekin. And enter Orion. His armies are nowhere near as powerful as Durfu, Draika, or the Sisters of Twilight. In fact, up until a recent patch, the Sisters were by far and away the best legendary lord for the Wood Elves. But then Creative Assembly gave Orion some major buffs. Not necessarily in terms of combat ability, but rather in his upkeep. So he still has to recruit units for money, right? But if you get involved in 25 wars, you're going to maintain every army for free. What does that mean in practice? Well, the Wood Elves are designed and balanced around the idea that you're going to pay upkeep. So their economy is based around the idea that you're paying upkeep for your armies. What happens when you remove that? It means, realistically, that your economy goes through the roof. And you can continuously recruit large armies every turn, not run out of money, or run out very slowly, and maintain those, as long as you are involved in a lot of wars. And that means you can maintain far higher quality armies across the campaign map far easier than any other legendary lord of the Wood Elves can. And the other legendary lords can maintain some very good quality armies. Like, I personally dread going into a battle against Draika if I'm playing any of her neighbors, because she is just that scary. Sisters of Twilight are absolutely insane. And in fact, my game plan when I'm dealing with the Wood Elves on the campaign map is to just bring free armies to the fight to resolve it. Because their range power is ridiculous, and their melee power with Treekin is absolutely insane. Treekin are one of those units that may not seem all that special when you're looking at them statistically speaking, but when you see these guys in battle, it is insane. They cause fear, they are very hard to take down, they have a lot of HP, a lot of armor, good leadership, very hard to break these guys, incredibly hard to break these guys in a battle. I've won battles fighting with Treekin that I should have really lost, but they're just insane. And this combined, and the Treekin combined with Orion's benefit, well, I think Legend of Total War showed it very clearly not too long ago when he was playing an Orion campaign and he was just running around with massive numbers of Treekin across the campaign map, because that's all you really want to recruit, until of course you get Treemen, which are even crazier than Treekin. So you can move on to the next logical step and get a bunch of Treemen in your campaign, and you get stacks upon stacks upon stacks of these guys. Your only concern is recruitment cost, but recruitment cost isn't too big of a problem. In fact, one of the major benefits for both Tomb Kings and for the Beastmen is the fact that they pay no upkeep and also recruit units for free. But of course they have the limitation in terms of how many quality units they can recruit. The Wood Elves don't have the limitation in terms of how many units they can recruit. They do have to pay for them, but if you're playing Orion, you don't have to pay upkeep for them. That gives you an insane, ludicrous level of power. Like, Wood Elves are already good, certainly, but you combine Wood Elves with the upkeep benefit he gets for every war he's fighting, then things get pretty insane with Orion, and you can paint the map in a way that very few other factions can match. And that's the list. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you boys and girls next time.